Hello, Blake Rudis here with your ON1 inspiration video. And today, I don't necessarily want to take you to an extreme place. What I want to do is I want to talk to you about the importance of going back to extreme places. See what I did there? So if you're looking at this photograph and you're saying, Blake, gosh, what are you doing to me? Stop showing me this overly garish, nasty HDR photograph of what could be a beautiful sunset. Well, here's the deal. I post-processed this image about 4 years ago when I was very heavy-handed in the HDR process. And I was very proud of this image that you see here that now I look at and I want to put sunglasses on, and I even want to just jump through the screen and put sunglasses on you because it's absolutely putrid and horrid. But why? Why? Well, because our darks are entirely too dark, our highlights are entirely too highlighted. Even areas that shouldn't be in highlight are getting very bright punches of highlight like this area right here. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this image that just don't work. But back then they worked very well for me. Well, here I am in 2017, almost exactly 4 years from the time that I created this image, and I can tell you that my process has come a long way. And I'm proud of myself because my process has come a long way. And you should be too. So the idea behind this inspiration is that you go to images from the past. And I'm not talking stuff that you did last year. I'm talking stuff that you did 4 years ago that you are really proud of. Take those raw files or even those JPEGs and do a little bit more work of what you know now. Because if you haven't, here's the sad truth to this. And please don't be offended. But if you edit an image now that you edited 4 years ago and it doesn't look better, I think you should really reconsider what it is that you're doing when you edit photos. You should reconsider your process. You should reconsider what you like about your images, because here's the deal. Years usually equate to progression, and that's what we're going to see here. So this overly nasty, garish, disgusting HDR image is going to be transformed into a better, more new-aged sunset look for our photograph, okay? And it definitely has more of a sunset type of vibe to it and looks a lot better than this really dingy, dirty, disgusting HDR image that, quite frankly, did not actually speak to me like this sunset does here, that is a better representation of the sunset. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll show you everything I do to create this image. You can even follow along with me because the follow along image is available to you, and there's a PDF that you can download. So if you have any questions along the way, you'll see all the little screen casts that I've taken throughout the process. All right, so let's get away from this garish HDR look of the past and get into editing this photo with a better head on our shoulders, if you want to call it that. Like I said, you know, a lot of times I go back to old images to see what I did to them. I look at them and said, oh gosh, and then I process them again to see what I would do now. So what I've done is I've reset all the settings for this follow along image that you can follow right along with me, and we'll get right to it. So I'm going to start off by going into develop, okay? Once we get develop opened, the first thing I want to look at is the image straight? Now it is kind of cockeyed, and you can see that there are some cameras, some security cameras here that I'm not really going to worry about fixing up for this. My main concern here is not necessarily that this is a great epic photograph that I want to share with the world, but it definitely is going to be better than this photograph that we had from the past, okay? Because this is way overly processed HDR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this image is level. So I'm going to go to my crop tool and I'm going to grab the level, and I'm just going to drag from this end of the image all the way over to this end of the image right along that line to make sure that my horizon is particularly level, because I know that this edge should be about the same length as this edge, and I'll press enter. And now I can start my editing process. So with the editing process, I'm going to start off by right here in develop, just going into my overall settings. Now the real magic isn't going to happen in these overall settings. That was my problem of the past. My problem of the past was that I would try to get that image looking as close to good as I could get, well, in good and quote unquote my terms back then, reality with the HDR process. But really what I was doing is more harm than good, okay? And We'll start off no frills really here with the overall settings, but the real magic is going to come in with the local adjustments. So with our basic settings, I'm just going to go ahead and look at my histogram, and I'm going to get my black and white levels straight here. So I'll just go ahead and hit J, and what J does is as I hit J and click on the image and move this slider, it shows me where I'm starting to blow out. So I'm going to bring this down well below the point of blowout, probably around 4 or 3. If you look at the histogram here, you can see that we just basically increased our whites just a little bit. And then we'll come over to our blacks and we'll press J and we'll move those down and move those up. Again, if we press J and press it as we move it, it's going to show us that we're going to start to clip around the -3 range. So I'll go right about the -2. Let's go up just a little bit more and invite a little bit more black into there to about the just 3, somewhere between 3 and 5 should be okay. So now that I've got my black and my white points set, I can come in here to my highlights and my shadows. Now it doesn't seem like I did a whole lot because I didn't really move those whites much and I didn't really move those blacks much, did I? But in this image, it doesn't really do much. But in another image, that setting the white point and the black point could make a world of difference in the end result. So now I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my exposure here and see if I need to increase or decrease my exposure. Probably just leave that alone and put that right at 0, okay? And then let's look at the highlights and the shadows, because the highlights and the shadows are what can bring out some of this image a lot more. And we're working with a raw file. Even the image that I've given you to follow along with me is a raw file, so feel free to push the limits of this raw file. Now this might be pushing it a little too far, but if we bring this down to about the 46, 48, somewhere in the 40s range, I think that looks pretty good on the shadows. And now the highlights. I'm going to go ahead and bring those highlights up and bring them down. I like it when the highlights are up. Actually, I don't like to bring this down and invite that tone compression in the background because that gives me that kind of HDR look. I'll just bring this up and invite that really nice, sunset that we had that night here in Kansas City, and bring that up just a little bit more to about 15 to 17 range is okay. And here's where I could come in and I could modify the contrast. Anytime I adjust these sliders here, these highlights and shadows, I always come in and do my contrast. And basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a good baseline image to bring over into my local adjustments. Because in the local adjustments, I'm going to work on the sky and I'm going to work on the foreground quite extensively, but I need a good amount of data going into that so I can understand what it is I can actually pull out with those local adjustments. Here we have the structure and the haze. What I'm going to do with the structure is I'm going to bring it down and bring it up. What you'll notice sometimes is as you're editing these settings up here, the structure might need to come up just a slight bit. So I'll bring that up to about the 10, anywhere between 5 and 10 range. I'll go right in the middle, about 8. And then the haze, I'm not really going to mess too much with haze. I might bring this up a little bit because if I bring it down, I'm going to get a lot. I'm going to really pull away a lot of the blue that's happening in those yellows back there. If I bring it up, it gets really bad. So I'll right about there is good. And those are just some fine tuning adjustments. Now I can look at my overall temperature and my tint. So if I bring my temperature up, that's going to make it overly more warm, and I do want it to be more warm. So I'm going to bring this up to anywhere between 15 and 20 is good for this image, I guess. And then with our tint, I'm going to bring this up and invite some more magenta in there because I really like the way magenta sunsets look. It's just, maybe it's just me, but I do enjoy them quite a bit. With our vibrance, we can bring that up and down. Maybe just a little bit of extra vibrance, not a whole lot, and that looks about good. It's a good starting point. It's a very good starting point for me to hop over into my local adjustments. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop right in here to local adjustments, and these are local adjustments that are happening in develop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my perfect brush up here, and the perfect brush is pretty neat because if we press the right bracket key, it will make the brush bigger. We press the left bracket key, it makes it smaller, but if we press Shift and the left bracket key or the right bracket key, it makes the actual brush in the center smaller, and you see that dotted circle on the outside in between that hard circle? That's the soft edge. So what I like to do is actually set this brush to about here because that gives me a lot of lenience in my perfect brush settings as I brush around my photograph. So with this, when I start off my perfect brush, as I'm brushing into my photograph, I really like to do something really drastic to see what's happening, like bring my exposure way down. And it's not going to look good, but it's going to help me see exactly what it is that I'm selecting as I'm using my perfect brush, okay? And again, it's not going to look great, but it helps. It definitely helps. And I'll fine tune this in a second. So I'll bring this around and just get a nice feathered brush. Now you see that feather that's in my brush right now? That feather is actually happening up here. As I told you before though, that's that left and right bracket key that I was doing on the fly. So if you're wondering what my feather settings are up there, that happened from me pressing the shift and left or right bracket key to get my feather set exactly where I want it, okay? So I'll just come right around this building and I'll click even more in here. Again, it should look really bad back there. Don't judge me. This is actually helping us make our mask, okay? So keep on painting around and painting around. If you're following along with me, this is the awkward part where you're like, okay, Blake, speed it up, but I can't because I'm working with the stuff here. That's just how it goes. Slow making of the masks. And you definitely want to be slow and tedious with this because we're actually going to use this mask and borrow it for the next adjustment layer. If you grab a little too much, that's okay. You can press Alt or Option and then click on the area that you grabbed a little too much of and get rid of it. So you can make some really good masks on the fly. And what I'm going to do with this now is I'm going to go ahead and click on my mask up here and press the O key. And if you see, I have my view set up so that I have a black and white background like this. This lets me see exactly what I might have selected too much or too little of. So I use that exposure to bring it all the way down to help me make my mask, and then I fine tune that mask by going in here with this view. If your view isn't set up this way, right click on your mask and go to view mode, and yours might be set to red overlay. I like mine to be set to grayscale because it really lets me see. The red overlay doesn't let me see all these little intricate parts of the mask that I didn't necessarily get, or the parts that I might have gotten too much of. So if I press Alt or Option and click on this area, the perfect brush is pretty smart in that it will say, okay, you don't want me to do this, but if you keep clicking on it over and over and over again, Blake, I get it, you don't want it. So if I click over here, again, Alt or Option, clicking over here to get rid of that. But then if I make my brush a little bit smaller and I get in here really intricately, I can get more of those areas because the smaller the brush, it's fine-tune refining this mask a little bit with those areas that it didn't quite pick up before because the brush was a little bit too big. Okay, so just go through and fine-tune and refine all those areas. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And it really doesn't have to be perfect unless you start to see some issues. No pun intended. Perfect brush. Get it? It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to try and get it as best as I possibly can. Okay, and for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to say we're going to move on because you'll be sitting here watching me do this all night getting all these little intricacies. One of the things that you can do though is if the perfect brush isn't selecting things like you want it to, you can turn perfect brush off and you can just start free form painting on here to get rid of certain areas, because now it's not trying to select pixel values. It's actually just saying, hey, you're showing me the brush that you want me to use on here. I'm going to go ahead and just deselect those areas. Now you gotta be careful though, because if you go too far or too close into that black area, it will then just select it without the perfect brush. So if we press Command or Control Z, we'll just get rid of that. And this is gonna be good enough for me for now, okay? So from here, let's go ahead and press O to get out of this view, and let's get rid of that nasty -5 exposure value that we had there, okay? So this is gonna be the mask that I use for both of my local adjustment layers. And it looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to get it all set up for the sky, and then I'll go ahead and make another adjustment layer for the foreground, okay? So let's go ahead and look at our settings here that we can really pull out from this sky back there. So, you know, you don't have to be that overly HDR guy that I used to be, okay? It doesn't need to be that brute force of an HDR look on our image for it to still be a good looking photograph, okay? And we can still pull out that data by not going to that extreme that I went to before. And we get a really nice glowing sky up there when we make our settings about like this. And again, if we want to add some more magenta up there, we can do that because we're right here in that local adjustment for just the sky, because this is only affecting our sky area. So let me go ahead and see if what we want to do with our highlights. I think I'll leave the highlights alone because, like I said, I like the way those looked. Now, does it make a difference? Absolutely. Look what we pulled out of that sky. It looks really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new adjustment layer. So now I've got this new adjustment layer. I need to come down to this one, select this adjustment layer right here, press copy on these mask settings. Then I'll come up to this adjustment layer and press paste. So that's going to go ahead and give me the mask for the layer underneath. But I don't want that mask to affect my sky. I want it to affect my foreground. So all I got to do, I don't have to go through all that painstaking process of remaking my mask. I just press invert. And now it's only affecting my foreground. Because if we look at the way masks work, anything that's white will be affected, anything that's black will not be. So now I have the ability to modify these settings for just the foreground. In my last inspiration video, I think I did something very similar, but instead of using the perfect brush, I used the masking bug or the graduated mask adjustment, if you want to call it that. So with this one, I can just come in and I can start modifying what the foreground looks like and see what I like here. Maybe boost up some of the contrast in that foreground. Maybe come in and bump up some of the highlights. Increase the shadows. If I increase those shadows, I'm going to get a really nice look in the foreground that works well with the background there. I might even come in here to the detail slider and give this a punch of detail. Now there's another thing I can do to get that HDR look in this image that's not as garish as what I did in the past, because that's the whole point of this inspiration video. So let me go ahead and bring up my color here so I can get a little bit of warmth in the foreground, and then maybe bring up some of the tint in there also, and then drop the saturation a little bit. And again, there's a follow along PDF here too. So if you need help with any of these settings, you'll have the PDF that goes through exactly what I'm doing right now. So I think that looks pretty good. And I could almost be done with this, because if we look at this image, it definitely is a step above this nasty HDR look that I did before, but I do want to push it to an extreme. I do want to go into my artistic looks and kind of give this that HDR look that I like with all the detail, but not necessarily to everything. So how would I do that? Well, I'll come over into effects. I'll make sure I go back into the overall settings here so I'm not stuck in the local adjustments. I'll add a filter and I will add an HDR look. And when I add this HDR look, I'm going to do some really nasty, disturbing things that I don't suggest you do to any photograph unless you're going to do it selectively. But here's the deal. Let's take our detail and slam it up to 100. Let's take our compression and bring that up quite a bit. And let's take our clarity and even bump that up quite a bit. So this is an ugly, garish, nasty HDR photograph. And I'm doing it on purpose because what I need to do now is I need to only apply this to certain areas of the image. Because let's face it, while it is bad, there are some good things here. I like some of the detail that is now coming out in the building, in the brickwork of the building. But I don't like that it's happening to everything, and my sky looks like absolute trash. So what am I going to do? Grab a mask and press invert. Now it's not going to do anything. But if I come here and I get the perfect brush and I turn that on and I press Alt or Option and I paint on here, watch what happens. It starts to bring back that HDR look in those areas that I want it to be in, which is just in the building and nothing else. And you can be very painterly with this. This is a really great technique for your images. You don't have to go this hardcore with it, but I like to start really heavy and work my way down from heavy, because if I don't know what the extreme is, I don't know if I like it or not. So I'm at the extreme of what I would say with this HDR effect, okay? I'll come in here and grab a little bit more of this area, maybe a little bit more of this area next to this giant sculptured vase here, maybe a little bit here too. But all we have to do, because we have the highest potency of this compression, detail, and clarity, is just drop this down a little bit. Drop our opacity down until it gets to a point that we actually like it. So if you see the before, no detail in that building, now we have the after. There's some detail in that building. We're bringing out some of those highlights, some of the intricacies in the detail in this photograph. So if I press the O key, you can see exactly where I painted. And again, this is where you can get more intricate. Press Alt or Option to include some more of these areas. If you're wondering where this is actually the World War I Memorial in Kansas City. I love shooting here. This is my go-to place when I want to shoot, as I go to the World War I Memorial. And that looks pretty good there. I'll just press the O key to get out of there. And again, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. And if it's still too much, just drop the opacity a little bit to the taste that you like, okay? Because everyone's gonna have a different flair with that HDR look. So we can bring out some of the details in our images with that HDR process, but we don't have to be so, hey, here's an HDR club and beat people over the head with it. And now I'm going to go in and do one last thing. And that last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab and add a filter, and I'm going to do the split tone. And one of the things that I like about split toning is what we did here. If we go back over into develop or even just look at our local adjustments here, we separated our foreground from our background. When we separated our foreground from our background, look what we did here. We modified tone and color of our background. So now what we need to do is we need to tie those colors back together. And the best way to do that is actually by using, and this is my opinion, okay, is by using a split tone, because a split tone will apply one color to all of your shadows and your highlights regardless of your local adjustments, and it will apply another color to your highlights or your shadows depending on what you pick and what color you pick to have on there. Okay, so let's hop back over into effects here and we'll go ahead and refine this split tone. By default, I really love the way Oats looks, and it gives me a good starting point. And now I like the way this looks, but as I look at this, if you notice what happened when I turned that setting on, everything got washed out. Well, why is that? Because we're applying a wash of color to our image. So what do we need to do? Well, there's a blend mode in here, and this blend mode, after you click that gear icon, is called color. Because what color will do is it will apply the colors of the selected layer to our image, but preserve the underlying image's luminance values. Okay, Blake, what the heck does that mean? Well, that means that we're going to apply these split tone colors to our image, but we're going to allow our darks and our lights to slightly show through that color. So if you see there, what that did was that helped preserve some of the shadows in here, and it helped preserve some of our highlights in the background. And now we can make our adjustments to our color. So with this first color, I'm going to set my highlights to a nice, bright, vibrant red and press OK. I might come in here and bring the amount down just a little bit, and then I'll come down to my shadows, and I'm actually going to give my shadows a nice, vibrant blue. And that might be a little too vibrant, maybe more of a blue with a little bit of purple tied into it. So right about here, I think should be good, right there. Almost like an ultramarine blue. And again, if this is too much, you can come up to opacity, drop your opacity, or bring the amount down in the color that is giving you too much color. So now we've still got that nice vibrant sunset look on our photograph that if you look at what happened before, that was the before and here's the after. We've really over exaggerated some of that color, but what I like about that, especially in ON1 Photo Raw, is if I come back up to those local adjustments, if these adjustments that we made are too over exaggerated, what you can do is you can come here very quickly and very easily drop the opacity of the culprit. So the sky, now that I'm looking at it, is a little too much and a little over the top. I can just drop the opacity of that local adjustment for just the sky and now have a more refined image that isn't too over the top with color and definitely isn't too over the top with the HDR look like we had here. So the basic idea here is with this inspiration is I always go back to images from the past. And I say, okay, Blake, edit this photograph that you edited from years ago. So while I said this image isn't necessarily the greatest photograph in the world to edit, it's a very good practice and case study for me to see where I've come with my process from where I was with my process in the past. 4 years ago, I was actually proud of that HDR image. But now my process has changed. My ideas about image processing and the way a finished image should look should be different. Well, guess what happens now? 4 years from now, in 2021, when I come back to this photograph, I guarantee you I'm going to do different things. I'm either going to do different things based on the software that's available to me at the time, or I'm going to do different things based on the way I think about my art. Okay? So keep those things in mind, and I challenge you now, after watching this inspiration video, to go back and edit some images from the past that you've created, whether they're good or bad, and see where you stand now. What do you like about the image from the past? What I liked about the image from the past is the nice brickwork that I had from the HDR process. But I didn't need all that nasty sky stuff happening in the photograph. So keep those things in mind as you edit, and always go back to images from the past and see what you can do to make them better. I just want to thank you for taking the time to watch this ON1 inspiration video. Again, my name is Blake Rudis. Please leave any comments that you have about this process or about the idea of going to images from the past. All right, so just to give you a little bit more information here for what I would do with this photograph now that the new ON1 Photo RAW 2017.5 is out. So this is how things go. The folks from ON1 will say, okay, Blake, we would like an inspiration video. And I say, okay, and follow suit, and I record one for them. And sometimes that recording goes out almost immediately, and other times that recording takes a while. And that's just based on their schedule and when they want to put those things out, okay? So what happened was the video that you just watched, I recorded with the older version of ON1 Photo RAW 2017 before the new additions were added. And because it was such a major update, I want to show you some things with this image now in 2017.5 after it's been edited, and how I would do those with the new tools that are in ON1 Photo RAW 2017.5. And I'll give you a nickel for every time I say that, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and scroll down here, and if you'll look here, when we open up the RAW file, we're gonna see our tone and color pane, but you're gonna see that a details pane automatically pops up with your sharpening and noise reduction settings here. Okay, we'll just turn that off, and if it's a RAW file, it will have lens corrections here that are automatically applied to our image. And you'll notice that as I was working on that photo in the last video, the stairs look like they're like, wah, like kind of drooping off to the sides, like they're lazy stairs or something like that. Well, if we hit the lens correction button here, or just leave it active as it stands when we open that RAW file, you'll see that they are now straight along the bottom. Much better. Love the fact that they added the lens corrections in with the new version of 2017.5. The other thing that they've added here, and I told you in the video, I'm not going to worry about clone stamping. Well, that's because I didn't feel like jumping into layers. But now it's right here in the develop module, and I absolutely love it. So I'm going to go ahead and click right here and show you how I use the clone stamp tool to get rid of these pesky little security cameras that just ruin the photograph. So we'll hit the fix button right here. It looks like a little stamp to be like the clone stamp, okay? So if we look at our brush size here, this is how big we're gonna make our selection of wherever it is we're gonna be selecting from. Notice up here you have the opacity of that and also the feather of that. I like to keep my feather around 80 to 100%. And what that does is it ensures that I get a nice feathering edge as I grab from one place in my image and move to another. If your hardness or if your feather is set to 0, it's gonna be a very hard edged brush, and I'll just show you that. So we'll drop this down to 0, and I'll press Alt or Option and click right here. That's going to tell me to make a selection from this area of my image, and I can come right over here and just boom and plop that right down. But I also told you that because it didn't have a feather, it would be a very hard edge. And if you look at it, there is a hard edge around that area of the image, and it doesn't look great. So I'll press Control Z to get rid of that, to do undo and get that clone stamp off of there. And I'll take this feather and bring it up to about the 80 mark. Okay, so go back up to 80, press OK. So now what you'll see is if we press Alt or Option and select from an area in our photograph like this and bring it on over, we can get a much better stamp for that area in my image. And now I typically work rather slow when it comes to clone stamping, and I select areas that look exactly like the area that I want to modify. So this looks similar, so I can click there, and then I'll just click around and start clone stamping out this pesky little camera. Now there's a couple cameras on here, and there's also what looks like some kind of antenna there, and we can get rid of that too. But you can see that what it's doing is on that raw file, it's actually taking the data from one part of your image and replacing it on the part of the image that you don't like. Now you may have to press Alt or Option and click a different area from time to time. So I'll click over here now and then hit right here. Notice how with the feathering of that brush, it's allowing the clone stamp to blend in with the area around it. The one thing that you want to avoid when you're using a clone stamp tool, and this is with any clone stamp tool anywhere you're using it, whether it's ON1 Photo RAW or Photoshop or Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, wherever it is that you're using a clone stamp, okay? The biggest thing that I see in error when people are using the clone stamp tool is they select things that are too close to that object, or they select what would be a repeating pattern. And you don't want a repeating pattern in a very close environment. Because if you've got a repeating pattern in a close environment, what happens is our eye picks up on it immediately. And we say, oh, yep, that person used a clone stamp. And we've got a really kind of interesting story about that. So my wife and I were about to get our pictures done for our engagement session from this photographer. I should have known not to use this photographer for our wedding, but whatever, we did anyway. I was young and I didn't know much about photography at the time. And this photographer said, you know, my wife is so good at using the clone stamp tool. Watch, she made these chairs disappear. And yeah, she did make the chairs disappear from the area that was a problem in the photograph. But what happened is one of the chairs ended up with 6 legs instead of 4. Well, if you look close enough, you can see that repeating pattern, and it basically tells the viewer right away, okay, that person cheated by using the clone stamp tool. Now, what you'll notice here is that because I use very small little stamps here, we have what looks like a little arch here. So what I would do is I would make this a little bit bigger and now make another selection. So press Alt or Option now that this is a little bit bigger from a different area of the photograph, relatively close to it, and just cover up that little arch with a bigger stamp and allow that to blend in. So now when we take our view here and we get out of here, we just get back to fitting this on the screen. You can see that we have a much better usage of the clone stamp tool there. I can see there's a little bit of like a little triangle little thing coming up here. It's okay. I can zoom back onto that area and I see that that little triangle was a culprit for me for a big problem. So what I'm going to do again, I'm just going to press Alt or Option and click an area that's relatively close to that like this and just come right here and boom, cover up that little triangular shape that I had there. And if it's a little bit too bright, that's okay. We can cover it up. We can press Alt or Option and click maybe up here. And this is a slow, tedious process. It's not something that you're going to find right away, and it's not something that's going to be very easy to do. It takes some time, it takes some practice, and it takes some patience. So make sure that you allot enough of all of that to get this exactly the way you want it to be, okay? And one other thing you can use in conjunction with this is the retouch brush. So if I click the retouch brush, you can see that area that's really a pain in the butt to me. If I just click this and do this, the retouch brush is going to select areas that are around it and fix that area for me. So you use the clone stamp tool, like you saw here, to get rid of the camera, and then you can go in and you can refine that area that you touched up with the clone stamp tool with the retouch brush. So if I take the clone stamp tool and I come over here, I can press Alt or Option and click maybe this area of the building and very carefully line this building up. If this is off like that, the viewer is going to see it right away. So make sure you're really close, like right there. Boom. And don't move. Okay. Might have moved a little bit, but it's okay. So I use the clone stamp tool to get that one little patch there, and then I can come in here and I can use the retouch brush to just say, all right, get rid of that little guy for me. Because if you take the retouch brush too close to an edge, it will do some really weird artifacting. And let's go ahead and zoom out and see what this looks like now. Much better, much better up there. Now, if there's a little bit that's there, I get really picky when I'm using my clone stamp tool, my retouch brush. If you see that there's like a really hard edge around it like that, even though it is a soft, hard edge, again, just go in with your clone stamp tool, select an area that's relatively close by pressing Alt or Option like that, and then just coming right over top of it. If you increase the feather, it will feather in even more. So if we take that up to 100% now, instead of the 80% that it was, you'll see that we get a much better feather around that edge that was creating a problem for us. And that should look so much better at this point. Press Alt or Option, click around this area, and just cover that up. Sometimes if you just make a bigger brush, that helps out too. Covers that area up a little bit better with one big swatch instead of very small little swatches. That looks much better. Okay. Like I said, clone stamping is not an easy thing to do. There's a science behind it, okay? So make sure you give it the time that it deserves to get it the way you want it to look, and not try to go too fast, because you don't want to end up with a chair with 6 legs, okay? So let's go ahead and zoom into this area right here and do this one last one. We'll take the clone stamp tool, and we'll press Alt or Option and click right here on the building, right here. And then just move it on down. Again, my brush is too big, because you can see if I were to do this right now, it's going to have a selection of the camera in there because my brush selection was too big. So I'll just make it a little bit smaller by pressing the left bracket key, and that's going to help me out when I go to make this modification here. Just boom. And then we'll start making our brush a little bit smaller and selecting other areas that we can paint out on here. So the idea behind the stamp or the fix tool is to use it in incremental small little steps until you get that part that you want out just right, okay? So then we'll make this a little bit smaller, press Alt or Option, maybe click over here and start covering up these areas. Here's what I would have done during that tutorial if I had those tools at the time. Now that those tools are added, you can see that they're very powerful because it removed a lot of the distractions in this image that I just did not like having in there. So thank you for taking the time to watch this. I do appreciate it. I know it's a continuation to the tutorial I just did, but I really needed to show you how to use the clone stamp tool effectively so it doesn't look like you used a stamp tool at all.